Hi everyone, sorry about that. As Alex said, I'm Vickery, I'm the lead data scientist at Media. I think we've already heard quite a bit about AI already this evening, which is nice, so it's kind of leads up to this talk. I'm going to give a talk called Pair Programming with AI. So I think there's been a lot of talk in the media lately about things like chatGPT and some tools that are coming out now. Some of them have been around for a while, but it's starting to be going into mainstream really to kind of help with programming, so like code assistants powered by AI. These tools are powered by something called generative AI. So in my talk today, I'm going to talk about what generative AI is, the use cases, a little bit about how it works at a high level, and then I'll talk a little bit about the coding tools, like my own experience with using them and how it's helping me. So, first of all, before I get into generative AI, I'll start with what AI is. So AI, as this slide says, is the ability for computers to think and learn. In effect, AI is, or as we know it today, is powered by deep learning and machine learning. And deep learning and machine learning are essentially tools that allow us to map very complex relationships and patterns in data and use those complex relationships and patterns to make some predictions. AI needs, at high level, three core things to work. It needs data. You need to find some patterns and relationships in the data, so we can't have AI without that. It also, AI works with mathematical computations, as Alex knows, I think, about the maths in AI. So yeah, it's all just basically mathematical computations which form models. And we've been able to do mathematical computations to map patterns in data for quite a long time. So what's different about AI? So with AI, we're mapping much more complex relationships and patterns. We're generating millions, potentially, of calculations, so we need a lot of computational power in order to do that. So, moving on to generative AI, so what's different? So AI is just about making predictions in general. Generative AI is about making predictions that effectively produce some content or generate things. At the moment, that typically looks like this. So generative AI tools that you might come across can generate images, they can generate text, and video and audio. I'm sure, I don't even need to ask who's used chatGPT. Has anyone not used chatGPT? Would be a better question. Okay. So anyway, we're hearing a lot about generative AI at the moment, but actually it's not completely new. The idea of it has been around for actually quite some time. One of the earliest generative AI programs was called ELIZA, and it was built around about mid-1960s by a professor at MIT. It was a very simple program, so this one was just kind of, it used pattern matching and things, so it would just take a sort of keyword or phrase that from the person, the user, and then generate a response from that just programmatically. So it was really simple. It was actually meant to be a psychotherapist, but apparently it was very convincing at the time. So it's been around for a long time. So what's different? Why are we hearing so much about it now? And it sort of seems to have taken this great leap forward. Well, obviously it's become, much more powerful than it was before, and much more sophisticated. And that has been enabled by a few things. And again, this relates back to those kind of requirements that AI needs. So we have seen massive growth in data. And that's really been partly due to the internet. So, things like Google, we're collecting billions and billions of data points now that we didn't have back in the 1960s, and we didn't have the ability to collect that data. The models themselves have become a lot more sophisticated. So we've seen deep learning move on as a field a lot lately. And then very importantly, if we are creating, so if you think about the size of the data that these generative AI models are trained on now, you are talking about billions and billions of data points. So, and the model's more sophisticated, so patterns that are mapped much more complex. So the greater computational power is required, and we have that now, and it's increasing pretty much every day. So how does it work? How does a generative AI work at a high level? As I've said, it basically takes very, very large volumes of data. It needs very large volumes of data. Data can be in the form of text, videos, images, whatever really you're trying to generate. We are seeing now generative AI that can take in multiple data types and then generate outputs. So, some that can generate images and text. Once we have all this data, we then train models. Typically, we use neural networks for generative AI, but effectively, we are still just learning patterns in the data, and then we create algorithms from that, and then we can use the algorithms to generate the responses that we want to get. So that's generative AI in general, but there's a really important concept that's worth talking about in terms of generative AI, and I think this is actually something that's quite crucial to where we're going in terms of the field, and that is foundational models. And chatGPT is generative AI, but it's built on top of a foundation model called GPT, and we've got other foundation models like BERT and DALL-E and things like that you probably hear about. So the idea behind foundation models is that they're very, very large models. They are trained on very, very large amounts of data for kind of very general purposes. The reason why they take a long time, they also take a really, really long time to train because they're trained on such large volumes of data. The reason why they are quite useful is because once they are trained, and they take a long time, they're quite expensive to train, you can then further train them or fine-tune them on more task-specific data to then create really useful tools. So the tools that I'll talk about a little bit later, the code assistants like GitHub Copilot and Code Whisperer, are examples of tools that use foundation models. There's other ones that you might come across in your day-to-day life, like Grammarly, Go uses foundation models now, and Duolingo. So, as I say, GPT is an example of a foundation model that's really widely used now. It's what's called a large language model because it consists of large amounts of text data. ChatGPT contains around 500 billion what we call tokens. That comes from the whole of the internet pretty much, as well as text from books, articles and documents. Still uses neural networks to train. GPT also uses some reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning is where we reward the model when it gets things right, and we take away rewards when it gets things wrong. So there's that kind of feedback loop around the training, and that's quite important. I'll come on to that a little bit later, why that's important. And then also some randomness. So the randomness is important so that what you'll find with things like when you're interacting with ChatGPT, if you ask it the same question, you'll generally get a different response every time, and that's from randomness, and that's why the randomness is there, so that you don't get the exact same response every time. And yeah, so the algorithms that are produced are then used to create the text-based responses. So this is quite a nice little website that's quite interesting to play around with from OpenAI. So you can see, essentially, you put some text in there, you can see how it tokenises the words. When we talk about tokens, tokens basically are important because it's kind of how the machine can effectively understand the language. So we'll turn words, sometimes it'll be whole words, so you can see the smaller words are whole words, sometimes it'll be parts of words. Those are effectively turned into numbers in kind of massive matrices, and then that's kind of how the machine understands the text. So that's a little bit about how generative AI works. What are the use cases? So I'm going to talk about this more from my own perspective. How am I using it at the moment? So I am a data scientist. I write code, so I'm using some of the code assistants, find them very useful. Also, as a data scientist, I have quite an interest in any kind of new developments in data science, so I'm very interested in generative AI in general. I also do quite a lot of writing, so I write on Medium, write blogs a lot, so I use it for some of that. So I use it to generate images because I want to get like royalty-free images, so I can generate some of my own images. The image of kind of the robot that's used on the front of this slide, that was generated from AI. And I use it maybe to get things like ideas for articles or writing prompts and things like that. It's very useful. I also manage a team, so for me, I need to make sure that my team are as efficient as they possibly can. So with the coding assistants in particular, it's really important that I have an understanding of them and can see if they can be useful for the team. So that brings me on to one tool that I've found particularly useful. I'm actually using this basically every day now, which is GitHub Copilot. Does anyone else use GitHub Copilot in the room? A few people. Great. Yeah, so it is, for people who aren't using it already, It uses GPT, and it's then fine-tuned on code to be able to generate code effectively. So it does things like it will generate code from comments. You can write a comment, and then it will generate some code from that comment. It provides suggestions, a little bit like somebody that I was talking to recently described it as autocomplete on steroids, which I think is probably quite true. It works with most popular programming languages. I mostly work in Python, but I think it does work on other languages, but I don't write in other languages very often. And it works with most IDEs. I use VS Code, so I use it in there all the time, but it works in other IDEs as well. So yeah, how does it work? As I say, it's GPT, it's a foundation model, and then it's fine-tuned with open source code, including the majority of public GitHub repositories. And then the algorithms are used to generate some code. So these are just some examples of how it does, how it works, how you interact with it. So effectively here what I'm doing is I'm writing comments. I've written this sort of kind of green comment here to say can write a function to do something that I wanted to do. I start writing the function, then what it will do at some point. Sometimes it's like there's a little bit of, I don't know, people that use it, sometimes it works really quickly, sometimes it's like a little bit of lag, but usually it'll come out with a suggestion in grey, and then what I can do is just accept that suggestion if I'm happy with it. Similarly, it's really good for doing things like writing doc strings, I found. So again, you can just write a comment, say, write me a doc string, and it'll do something, and at least it'll get you to a starting point.
So I just want to check, does it create the actual name of the function as well? Or did you
no, I had to write the name. I mean, yeah, so it's sometimes, it works differently, and I guess this is the randomness. Sometimes I'll write like a doc string, code comment, and it will just generate the whole function. Other times you'll have to start writing the function. It's a little bit random in the way that it works, I guess. But yeah, so that you can see here that it kind of, and I'll come onto this a bit later, but it doesn't always do everything for you, but it can get you a good start, and take away some of the grunt work, I guess, of writing code. I find it particularly useful writing tests, so particularly writing test cases in unit tests. That is probably one of the areas where I'm seeing the most productivity gains at the moment. So again, that function that I wrote earlier, Copilot wrote for me, I can then just start writing, I can add a code comment, write me some tests, and then start writing the tests, and then it'll give me at least a starting point for some tests, which is really useful. And then I can just accept that suggestion. There are others, so Copilot is one tool. There are other coding assistants out at the moment, probably more coming soon. Amazon Code Whisperer is one other example. So Amazon Code Whisperer is another example of one of those sort of fine-tuned models on top of foundation models. It's trained, as well as being trained on other code, it's also trained specifically on Amazon code, so it's really good if you're working with AWS a lot. Again, but it does support other programming languages, but it's particularly good for the AWS code. ChatGPT itself is quite good for code. It's not obviously the same as Copilot in terms of Copilot. It's very interactive in your IDE, but I find it quite useful for doing things like understanding code bases. So I might just paste in a code base to describe this, or rewriting whole functions and modules into other programming languages. That sort of task. And again, it's not trained specifically because it's not trained specifically for code. It still works pretty well, to be honest. So that's a little bit of overview of generative AI. As with any technology, there are some downsides. I've just put a few here, I'm sure there's probably more, to just point out. So one is around bias. So these, particularly like the large language models, they're trained on all of the data on the internet, and within that data there exists bias because we have bias in society. And so that bias does propagate through to these tools. I won't kind of go into it too much, but you can go and, if you interact with ChatGPT in certain ways, you can get some biases out that are quite shocking, to be honest with you. So some things I was doing when I was actually researching this talk was doing things like saying, write me a story about a job title, like write me a story about a shopkeeper, or write me a story about a doctor, and then it sort of just how it assumes the sort of race or the gender or whatever of those roles is so biased that it actually was quite surprising to me that is there. So it's one thing to be aware of, and I think it will probably maybe get better as time goes on, but yeah, there's quite a lot of bias there. The other drawback is, and probably partly due to the fact that it uses reinforcement learning, is that these kind of generative AI tools generally don't like to say, I don't know. They will try desperately to generate a response of any kind, even if that's wrong. So quite often, the code that you get back is not quite work, it won't quite work, or sometimes it can be completely wrong, but it can look really like it is right. So I think the important thing is that it takes away, I think, at the moment anyway, these tools, they take away lots of grunt work of writing code, like the boring stuff, but actually you still need to know how to write code to be able to use them, and you still need to be able to really understand, what's going on with the code, so that's important. The other thing probably to bear in mind is being really careful about entering things like sensitive information into particularly ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT, they say that they don't use the data you input as training data, which is probably true, but if you look at, if you're using it on the browser, you'll see that it stores your inputs for your use. But obviously, if you're working for a company and you enter customer information or something like that, you have to be really careful about that. It seems to have skipped forward to this slide already. Okay, no, it's fine. I was ready to move on anyway. I think maybe ChatGPT is.
Yeah, it's okay. They're rising up.
I'm back. Right, great. Okay. So I'm going to attempt to make some predictions about the near future. So I'm not going to make predictions about anything more than the very near future because it's really difficult to know where this is going to go. Thank you, Alex. But these are sort of some of my predictions. We'll see if they come true. So one thing is, I think foundation models, we're going to see a massive explosion in their use. So I think you'll see more and more companies adopting the use of foundation models to create their own types of generative AI that's for very specific use cases. I think particularly the niche code assistants, you'll start to see more of them, a bit like with the Amazon Code Whisperer, where it is trained on sort of Amazon-specific code. I think you'll start to see more of the tech companies bringing out their own versions of the coding assistants, and maybe everything, eventually. I use, for example, Snowflake in my day job. Snowflake has a web UI. I would imagine in the future, not too long, near future, you'll have within that UI a coding assistant that's trained on Snowflake syntax and will work. So that would be really nice if they do that. So I think that will happen. I think a really important future skill will be prompt engineering, so learning how to talk to AI. It's something you're starting to see talked about a lot. Actually, I found there was a course on, I think, Coursera, just been released in the last couple of days on how to be a prompt engineer. So I think that you'll start to see that as being an important skill, and it is a skill, especially with the code, is getting the input right to get the output that you want is a skill to learn. I expect generative AI to become more sophisticated at now pretty much exponential rate, so that's why it's very hard to predict where things are going to go, as we've got these kind of foundational models, and I think what you'll find is as people find more use cases, the investment in the space will increase, and I expect it to see a lot of growth there. The other thing I think is that companies will go through a bit of an AI transformation now. So I think a bit like the digital transformation that we've seen in previous years that companies are still going through. I work for EDF, we're still going through a digital transformation, but I think we'll go through an AI transformation now, so you'll start to see companies adopt not just generative AI, but generative AI in particular for things like productivity. I mean, we're already seeing at EDF, our IT team this week released Copilot as a sort of general purpose downloadable library, whereas before we'd had to log into a private account and guess it and stuff like that. So I think you'll start to see adoption from a productivity perspective, but also I think you'll start to see an explosion in terms of companies using it to create their own tools like chatbots and things. The other thing I think, because I think sometimes people think that everybody's jobs are going to be replaced by AI. I don't think it's going to happen in the near future. I don't know about the longer term future. I actually think we're going to see an increased demand for tech skills because of these tools. And I think the reason for that is because of what I've just said, that more and more companies are going to want to adopt the niche foundation models to create niche generative AI and things. And in order to, and obviously we need people to build those models, but we also need people to implement them into systems. So, other skills like software engineering and so on will be required for that. So I expect to see actually an increase in that area rather than a decrease, at least in the near future. I think that brings me on to finish, but thank you very much for listening. Any questions? Oh, it's... Oh.
The story you were talking about.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, I was debating whether to show this, but I will show this. So these are two of the examples that I thought were quite shocking. I'll let you see.
First line.
Yeah.
It's bad. And then the second one is, I'll let you read it. Oh, sorry. But basically, yeah, so when I said, tell me a story about a shopkeeper, the first thing that came up was the shopkeeper called Mr. Patel, and then I asked it, tell me a story about a doctor and a nurse, and it told me a story about a doctor who was a he and a nurse who was a she. And, you know, there are the biases that exist clearly in the data that it's trained on, but it's a shame to kind of propagate those through. I'm sure there's more. I mean, I didn't even look very hard for those. I just kind of thought, oh, I'll have a little look. Actually, I thought it was worse than I thought, because I kind of thought I'd have to really look for it, but I didn't. So, yeah, it's, one of the drawbacks.
Yeah.
Fun. Right. Thank you.
Questions? Hands up. Okay, start on the left, I'll go around.
In Italy, they banned chatGPT. What is your safeguard if they start banning the technology you're becoming dependent on?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I would say that I am not becoming particularly dependent on ChatGPT. I think I'm finding I do find it useful, but I think if somebody banned it, ChatGPT today, I probably would be able to do without it. I think things like Copilot, I'm finding very, very useful, and I would be very sad if that was banned, because I'm finding it particularly useful. But I think at this point, I don't think we're particularly dependent on it. I think one of the important things is with any of these tools, in particular the code assistants, is they don't replace people. They don't replace being able to code. You still have to learn how to code and know how to code and understand code. So you could probably just go back to just writing all the code yourself. But yeah, I kind of hope they don't ban Copilot.
I for one welcome our AI overlords. So with the rise of essentially machine learning, AI is getting more and more accessible to those that may not necessarily have the skills to do beforehand, and that was mainly confined to a data science team. I suppose, how do you see the change of that easily accessible stuff impacting how we use the internet? Because anyone can just spring up an AI to do a purpose for that, or a predictive model with limited technical background.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, there's a lot of risk in that. I think it's been around actually for a while, because I think although it's probably becoming more accessible, I think kind of machine learning in general has been reasonably accessible for a while. So there's lots of tools that the cloud companies coming out with, like drag and drop AI tools and stuff. Machine learning tools more. I think it's always been a concern. I think because the thing with things like machine learning in particular is there's lots of things. There's bias. There's a risk. There's also a not understanding when your model might be generating bias. I think there's also it's very easy with a machine learning model to create a model that looks like it's doing a really great job, but it's actually doing a really bad job. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to not realise that. So I think there's a lot of risk. I think that, I don't know how to mitigate that necessarily. I mean, I do still think we're a little bit away from everybody being able to just build and deploy the models. I think because actually building a machine learning model is one thing, but deploying it into a system is quite something else, and it's actually really hard to do. So I think maybe loads of people build models, but I'm not sure how easy they're able to connect it up to Google or something, So yeah, I don't know.
Two really odd questions. These are the sort of questions I think of when I'm just drifting off to sleep.
Are you sure you want to say that?
actors poisoning the master data sets as a cyber warfare tactic?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. So I think that I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, there are, I think with these, particularly these large language models, they are quite black box, so it's quite hard to understand, you know, how it's generated predictions, especially on the scale that you're working to with the data. It would be hard to sift through the data. I think the one thing to say is that you would have to, so for a model to pick up patterns, there needs to be quite a lot of examples of those patterns, so you'd have to feed it with quite a lot of the bad data to get it to do something really bad, which I think would be quite hard. I haven't sort of really heard of any stories of that happening, but maybe we will eventually.
My second question was, I work on a simple logic, which is the more of something there is, the less valuable it becomes. And so if AI were to go exponential in terms of text generation and image generation, essentially it would destroy the value of what it's creating. And that seems somewhat counterproductive as a social good sort of thing. If words are valueless and pictures are valueless,
I know exactly
they
what
are
you're talking about.
exponentially generated. Is anyone thinking?
I think it is something that's being thought about. So you know, it's really interesting. But I think there's a couple of things in that. I think it's a really interesting point around. So the value of like human created things over AI created things. So you know, if an AI can create a Picasso, you know, then where's the value in the Picasso? But I think, you know, my view at the moment anyway, I don't think these tools are good enough to, particularly in the text space. I think we heard this earlier. You know, for writing, it's quite good for like kind of getting ideas and things. But writing an article, it regurgitates kind of what is really kind of sort of rubbishy, almost like really bad SEO copy, basically, generally speaking. So I don't think there is anywhere near as good as humans anyway yet. They will possibly get there eventually. But I think the thing is that there's always going to be a value in what human can create over a machine, because it's just two different things, and especially if you're able to create something, like you say, like with an AI, I could say, draw me a picture of flowers, and it would just do it within like seconds. I think there's still value in what the human has done, and there's still something, I guess, almost intangible about something created by humans. So I don't think that value will go away. And then I think in terms of being more accessible AI, I think what that will do is just increase sophistication of AI, which I think is a good thing as long as it's used in the right way, because hopefully AI should relieve humans of like the drudgery. That's, I think, the what would be nice to happen. And actually, obviously, the more sophisticated they get, the more that will happen. And then humans can spend more time doing the great things like solving really, really hard problems and creating maybe masterpieces and stuff. So.
You can pick. Sorry, I took over.
So I actually quite like the idea of AI. I quite like the idea of like when your database suddenly becomes 10,000 times slower, to say to AI, my database has become 10,000 times slower. Give me some ideas as possible solutions to explore, so I don't have to go and read a dictionary of like database problems. But if something like chatGPT is going to come out with things which are kind of verging on things you shouldn't say to somebody, like it's going to say that a shopkeeper is etc. At what point would a company like EDF turn around and say, actually, we can't put this in front of an employee because they're going to sue us for harassment?
No, I know. So already, I'd say, like within, certainly within ETF, we're not really promoting the use of ChatGPT as much, because, and particularly for any kind of text, but partly because as well we don't want people pasting company information into it either. You know, I'm hoping, there's a lot of talk, when I was looking into bias, there's a lot of talk about how OpenAI are going to do put a lot more guardrails in place around sort of bias or inputs coming out that are just not very nice, that shouldn't be coming out. So I'm hoping that as the field progresses, that will improve. And I expect to see more maybe laws and guidelines coming from governments and things on regulating it as well. So I'm hoping that will happen. In terms of code, I mean, generally speaking, it just spits out code, so it's not too much of a problem with the code. But yeah, ChatGPT is a bit problematic, so I'm hoping that we'll start to see some guardrails around that. Sorry, I think you might be.
Okay, so it's more a remark rather
Yeah.
than a question, and a bit of an answer to your earlier question about poisoning the well of these models. I think that's quite hard because it's not trained on a well; it's trained on an ocean. Yeah, it's quite hard to poison the whole ocean. So
Yeah.
I don't see the risk there, but the risk is more in how you use it, because you can easily imagine you can use this to write phishing emails on an industrial scale. Or AI was basically Cambridge Analytica used AI to basically predict which Facebook user will respond in anger, how do you call it, in anger mode to certain ads that really appeal not to the brain but to the gut. Yeah, so that's basically how we got Trump. That's how we got Brexit. Yeah, so it's already a very, very powerful tool, and it is basically you can use it for good. Or you can use it for evil. Yeah, it's up to us, humans, to decide how we use it.
I'm not sure how hard it is to damage. If your ocean is about a very big topic, like if you were to pick out from an ocean and say something like, tell me something about France, it might be very difficult to poison the well. If your ocean, though, of data only includes a very small subset of data about a particular entity, then it gets difficult.
Okay.
So somebody I know is currently being told by anybody who asks that he's dead if you ask ChatGPT. and he's currently filing legal complaints to try and get this fixed.
Well, there's a guy in Australia, wasn't there, who...
Okay, interesting.
There's a guy in Australia who's suing because it's saying that he defrauded the company he worked for, and he actually
fake news.
was
This
in
is
prison
fake news. Yeah,
and was in
another-
prison, and he was a whistleblower. So, and that small data set.
We've probably got time for a few more questions, by the way. Just to,
Okay, I think we've got like 3, I think, or 4. Okay.
Oh,
So I don't know who was first. Shall we go here and then work back? Is that okay? Yeah.
I mean, I think just in terms of the sort of value proposition, I think there's perhaps a risk that it could go the way of sort of NFTs. You get so much of it, it just completely devalues it, as it were.
Yeah.
But in terms of, and we talked about poisoning the well, but do you think, I mean, with companies like Reddit, Twitter and so on starting to close the routes to getting their data, do you think that could potentially impinge upon the development going forward, or?
Yes, possibly. I mean, the thing is that particularly things like GPT that requires, it's very generalised model, so it requires a lot of data that's represented across as wide a arena as possible. So yeah, I think access to data, that's where data is one of those key. Where data is kind of everything about AI, and so access to data is really important. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, whether that's going to be a problem or not. This is where it gets really hard to start to make predictions about how things will go, because I guess data is quite valuable as well if you think about it. So at the moment, a lot of that data is public, which is why it's possible to do this. But yeah, if people start locking it down more, it gets more difficult.
Yeah, 3 questions. Well, 2 questions or 1 comment. I haven't particularly looked at ChatGPT because I really don't want to use ChatGPT so that I don't become too lazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I haven't looked. I think someone mentioned that they use the transformer architecture.
Yes.
And what was the percentage of accuracy? Was it 99% or 100%? Because we, in data science, we also want to avoid 100%.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know what the accuracy was. It won't be 100% because it's pretty much impossible, to be honest, to get 100% perfect machine learning or deep learning model because of randomness. There's always some randomness in anything, in all the data. So it's pretty much impossible. If you do get 100%, definitely questioning your model. But so no, I don't know what the accuracy was. I imagine it's pretty high. Hopefully, it seems to work quite well. So I think I haven't actually looked into the exact numbers.
Okay. The second question has to do with the AI ethics. I think someone already mentioned. How are you able to, relate what AI is to your customers? I think it also bothers me also. I'm trying to see how I could tell a layman how AI helps his daily activities or actions. And so, I mean, with EDF as a company dealing with every home, I mean, there should be a way for you to educate people on how you're getting their data through smart home monitor and smart media.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are actually very transparent about what we do in the data and tech space. One of the reasons why I'm here, we do a lot of talks like this on what we're doing in technology and data. We have like a LinkedIn page where we put posts, people can follow us, and we have a blog and stuff. So we talk a lot about the stuff we're doing. We're very open about what we're building, the data we use. And what we do have a big focus on is sort of explainable AI in EDF. We pretty much don't build any model unless we can explain it, so we don't, at the moment, we're not building any generative AI black box models. We're dealing with things that we can explain. So if a customer ever came to us, not happened yet, but if a customer ever came to us and said, how did you get this prediction from us, we would be able to tell them.
Yeah, the third one is a comment when I don't know his name, well, he mentioned the issue of poisoning the data. So while in the process of as a data scientist, data professional, we actually spend 80% of our time cleaning the data.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of work having to, sometimes if the project is 6 months, you do maybe 5 months of actually ensuring that your data is clean before you actually train and deploy it. So I think that should be encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding your data is really important, and totally, I would say definitely 80%, maybe even more, of my time is spent dealing with dirty data and cleaning it and understanding it. In fact, I had dinner with some people from AWS the other day, and the big thing that they were talking about was the generative AI, and they were saying, what use cases do you have at EDF? Are you using generative AI? And I said, well, to be honest with you, we're kind of spending most of our time trying to work out how to get better data quality. So I was kind of like, if you could maybe point all the clever AI at that problem, that would be great. But the thing is, those are hard problems, and that's the thing at the moment. The generative AI can only really solve AI in general can only solve those kind of fairly routine problems, not the really hard problems. So we still need lots of people to do those things. Sorry, Alex, how long have we got left? Because I think it's
we've probably overrun. We can do a few more. You've asked a few.
There's one question. This is a really interesting question. Sorry. I just thought of something which was like another context to how you.
Alright, I'll let you go. It's your last one.
Okay, so this is actually about using this in the workplace. So if you're using it in the workplace, if you say to someone, can you create something which is called Hello World, you have everything from kind of like the bash echo Hello World to, I think there's like the enterprise Hello World joke project on GitHub. The idea being that in a given context, a piece of code has different value and different needs. If you're in an enterprise, such as EDF, you must have tens, if not hundreds of pages of corporate policy, development standards and all the rest of it. Are you training your model with your corporate standards?
No, we're not. So we're not building any generative AI ourselves at the moment. We are just using the off-the-shelf tools like Copilot. So we use it like generic stuff, but we then will have to manually ourselves check that the code adheres to our standards and all of those.
Is there a way you can feed that in as part of the process?
No, you can't do that at the moment with any of those tools. You could build your own. If you were a big enough company and had a big enough code base, you could build your own generative AI, like fine-tune one of the foundation models to create your own company's code thing. That would be quite a good thing to do, but no, we're not doing that at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We'll go with sorry, and then.
So there are two questions. Hi. So I remember when Microsoft first came out with that autofill on steroids thing on Visual Code. It used data only from GitHub, and it happened to, in some cases, just set up copy someone else's answer.
Yeah.
And that's already sort of a problem where people already rely too much on what other people have posted.
Yeah.
And that leads to security risks.
Yeah.
So, I guess in the near future, if people start to rely too much on these sort of models, couldn't you also use them to break into places?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that is, again, these are all things which I think, these are quite new, these tools, I think, and the generative AI that we're seeing now, like ChatGPT and stuff, is really new. So, as I say, I think there's some catching up to do with regards to both like guardrails and stuff around bias and things like that, but also there's probably going to be some catching up to do around like security risks. I mean, the one thing about, so at EDF, security is really important to us because we're in the energy industry, it's highly regulated, we have really sensitive data. We have an IT team who look all the time at our code bases and to identify vulnerabilities and security risks. So we've got a really tight process around that. So like I say, we will use it as a tool to kind of help us to get like, I don't know, 50% or 70% of the way there, but we wouldn't ever just accept the code and just not bother to look at it, and understand it. So I think that's the way we're doing it right now. But eventually I think there'll be some sort of standards coming out when that thing. Are you broken for it?
So when it comes to intellectual property, right, where would you draw where would you draw the line of what is someone's intellectual property and what is something they just posted to show?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that again, another thing that is not defined at the moment is about who owns AI generated stuff. So, like, if you generate an image with AI at the moment, you sort of have free reign over it, but whether that'll change and it'll become like the company that built the AI. And I think, I guess what I would say at the moment is anyway, I think most developers, certainly I do, if I didn't have, before I used Copilot, I do this less now, I would go Stack Overflow all the time and copy and paste examples. I'd go to public GitHub repositories and copy and paste examples to get me started. So I don't actually think it's that much different from what I was doing before. It's just I don't have to go to Stack Overflow and Google the other things. So.
Well, my question was the same thing. It was what's the lay of the land generally about IP with anything generated from AI. But
so we
I imagine it's such a potential massive topic.
Yeah, so I think again, like it's really early days. So we recently implemented in our PR review, our PR process. So we've got a PR checklist. So when you generate a PR, you've got to say I've done this, this, and this. I've made sure my tests run, etc. And we've got a line in there that says, is any of this code generated with AI? And you have to tick that box now to say yes. So just so we have a record of that, really. We don't know what we can do with that.
So you get the AI to tick the box.
Yeah, but it's really fascinating. It's going to be really interesting to see how these things develop. We've got one more.
Just a comment. Just a comment. How many times on Stack Overflow have you looked for the answer and it's been wrong? And that's what Copilot's trend on. So my experience is 30% of the time it's correct.
Yeah, I know, but
and
I think
70% of the time it's just like every time you've looked at Stack Overflow and it's been wrong.
Yeah, I think exactly, and that's my point. Is that one of the drawbacks is that it won't always be right. I think it's, and very rarely do I just accept a bit, a whole piece of code, a whole function or module generated by AI, but what it does is it takes away some of the really boring stuff. So I find out with my unit tests, I work in data, so a lot of my unit tests are about generating kind of an input of data and then saying what's the expected result, and that is like writing that input and writing that expected result. Now with Copilot, it tends to, once I've written one, it will then sort of prompt me with others, and sometimes I have to go in and change it afterwards, but it's just taking away that some of that real sort of slog. So it's not, and I think, like I say, you have to still know how to write code. You still have to be really careful to like, read, and understand the code that's generating, not just accept it at face value. Yeah.
And in a big code base, it's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, I'm stopping it there, guys. Sorry. Right, thank you.